There's a question you carry in your pocket for weeks. You know it's there. You feel the weight of it. But you keep pretending you don't, because asking questions creates obligations. And I already have enough obligations for a lifetime. I asked anyway. And she stood there looking at me from across the kitchen, with the expression of someone who was expecting a completely different question. Or maybe no question at all. Natalie Rivera was good at that, making you feel like anything you said was already 1 second too late. Are you married? 3 words. Simple, practical, perfectly disguised as administrative logic. Except they weren't, and we both knew it. If you want to understand why it took me 4 weeks to ask a 4-syllable question, stay with me, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever clung to a rule you invented just so you wouldn't have to feel anything? My name is Olivia Carter, and I became a farmer the same way some people become adults. Abruptly, without asking for it, and with everyone around waiting to see if I'd fall apart. My father died 2 winters ago. What he left me wasn't just acres and cattle. It was a spreadsheet of decisions that never stop. Payroll, supplier contacts, debts nobody mentioned while he was alive, but that show up punctually after a funeral. And the quiet judgment of a small town, which specifically wasn't listed in the estate but arrived along with everything else. Around here, people still call this place Carterland, like my first name is a footnote. I don't correct them. I just work. I needed someone to handle the administrative side that was swallowing me whole. Spreadsheets, suppliers, payment coordination. Someone competent and discreet. I needed an employee, not a complication. Life has a terrible sense of humor. It was a November afternoon when I heard unfamiliar tires on the gravel drive. I was at the barn with a clipboard under my arm, checking a late feed delivery and pretending the sky wasn't changing. November in eastern Washington doesn't announce itself dramatically. It just grays out the world until you forget what bright looks like. The wind pulled at the loose metal on the shed roof, and the fields looked flattened, waiting. The car stopped near the farmhouse. Engine idling a beat too long, like whoever was inside was still deciding whether they actually wanted to be here. I didn't rush over. Rushing makes you look eager, and eagerness is the kind of vulnerability people use against you. When the door finally opened, a woman stepped out first. Mid-30s, practical coat. That upright posture of someone who's learned to appear composed even when she isn't. And behind her, a small girl held the car door with one hand and her backpack strap with the other, like those were the 2 most solid things in the world. Natalie Rivera, she said when we met at the porch steps, steady voice, the kind of steadiness that isn't arrogance, it's survival. This is Alice. The girl looked straight at me. No fear, just that honest curiosity children have and adults learn to hide. Natalie rested her hand on her daughter's shoulder. Light. Protective without being possessive. I looked at both pairs of boots. Natalie's, worn but clean. Alice's, pink with butterflies. Both caked in mud from the drive. Welcome to farm life. Inside the office, the heater made that specific noise of something that promises more than it delivers. Natalie sat in the chair across from my desk, hands folded, letting me explain the position without interrupting. Administrative support, invoices, supplier calls, payroll coordination. And the unspoken rule, this farm runs on discipline, not affection. If you need a soft place to land, wrong address. Alice drifted to the window and pressed her nose against the glass. Do the cows have names? She asked, with the gravity of someone conducting serious research. Something caught me off guard in my chest. Some do, I said. Alice smiled like I'd shared a state secret. Natalie murmured an apology. It's fine, I said, because it was. On the surface. Natalie didn't negotiate, didn't try to sell herself. She just listened, asked one question about the payment system, and when I finished, said she could start Monday. Period. No charm offensive. Quiet competence is dangerous. It invites trust. After they left, the office felt too still. I told myself it was the weather, the season, the normal emptiness of a farmhouse that had been mostly silent since my father's funeral. I went back to the numbers, stayed away from the thoughts. Monday, Natalie arrived early. No dramatic entrance, no small talk. She sat up at the spare desk like she'd been there before, organizing papers, creating order where I'd been surviving on chaos. By noon, she'd corrected an error I'd been avoiding for months because it felt too big to face. I didn't thank her, not because I wasn't grateful, but because gratitude opens doors, and I prefer mine closed. Alice started waiting after school in the kitchen, sitting at my table with her homework, while Natalie finished calls in the next room. I hadn't invited it. It just happened, the way these things do. The house adjusting itself without asking my opinion. One afternoon, I found a crayon on the counter and stood there long enough to realize I'd been staring at a crayon. I slipped it into a drawer I hadn't opened in years. The sound of a child in this house felt wrong at first. Then, unsettlingly, it started to feel normal. The workers accepted Natalie faster than I expected. Maybe because she didn't act like she was better than them. Maybe because she actually listened. I watched from a distance when she spoke with Miguel near the equipment shed. He was explaining a delay with the air of someone who expects to be ignored, and she was listening, really listening, asking questions that proved she was paying attention. Respect on a farm doesn't come from authority. It comes from competence. Miguel told me afterward, without me asking, "She's good, boss." I nodded, tried not to agree too much. Natalie kept her personal life locked down. No photos on her desk, no stories volunteered. But small things slipped through. How she tensed when the phone rang late. How she double-checked Alice's lunch before leaving. How she stayed a few extra minutes every afternoon, like she was measuring whether the day was safe enough to end. I didn't ask questions. Asking creates obligations. The rain came fast and sideways one night when Natalie stayed late to finish payroll. The kind of November rain that turns dirt roads into decisions you regret. I made coffee without thinking. Set a mug on the counter without asking if she wanted one. She picked it up with a quiet thank you and stood on the opposite side while I filled mine. We didn't face each other. The rain filled the space between us, heavy and relentless. "You don't have to stay," I said, in the most practical sense possible. "I know," she replied. "I want to." That should have unsettled me. Instead, I felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot I didn't know I'd been carrying had given way a millimeter. Later, when she went to gather her things, Alice was already asleep on the couch, her jacket folded under her head like an improvised pillow. Natalie hesitated, calculating the logistics of waking a 7-year-old in that rain. I heard myself say they could stay, just until it eased. Natalie looked at me like someone looking for permission, or risk. She nodded once. They left when the rain softened. The car disappeared around the drive, and the house felt emptier than before, like it had noticed the absence. I stood in the kitchen too long, listening to nothing, telling myself I was tired, that this was normal, that lines exist for a reason. But when I finally turned off the lights, I realized I'd stopped thinking of the farm as something I managed alone. It was becoming something I shared, and I wasn't sure when I'd agreed to that. The town noticed Natalie before I did. That's the problem with small places. They see shifts the moment they happen, even when you're still pretending nothing's changed. At the feed store, someone asked if the new woman was staying long. At the diner, a pause lingered a second too long when I said I wasn't eating alone anymore. I answered with the same neutrality I use for fuel prices and crop forecasts. Natalie handled it better than I would have. She didn't shrink. She didn't perform normalcy. She showed up to work like every stare was just another variable to manage. But I saw the effort it took, how her shoulders stayed set, how she kept Alice close when they were out, how she avoided standing too near me in public, as if proximity itself could start rumors she didn't have time to carry. One afternoon, a delivery ran late, and the sun dropped faster than expected. I found Natalie in the office with the door half closed, her head in her hands, the ledger open but untouched. She straightened when she noticed me. The apology was already forming. I waved it off and leaned against the doorframe. Silence filled the room, thick and uninvited. "My ex called," she said, before I could ask anything. Not an invitation to discuss details. A fact placed carefully between us. I nodded. People leave. That's the simplest truth I know. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. The tension in her jaw said enough. History that didn't resolve cleanly. Responsibilities that don't disappear just because someone chooses not to show up. Alice wandered in a few minutes later, completely unaware of the weight in the room. She asked if she could help feed the horses. I said yes, and I watched Natalie's face soften at the sound of her daughter's voice. Love shows itself in small, involuntary ways. You don't have to name it to recognize it. That evening, as we closed up, Natalie mentioned she'd been offered a job back in the city. Better pay, shorter hours, the kind of opportunity people are expected to take without thinking. She said it casually, like she'd already decided. I felt something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with business logistics. "You should do what's best for Alice," I said. It was the right answer. The only one I could give. Natalie looked at me then. Really looked. And for a moment I wondered if she was waiting for something else. A reason. A sign. I didn't give her one. I've learned that wanting can turn into pressure if you let it speak out loud. After they left, the farm felt off balance. Not broken. Just tilted. I walked the fence line at dusk, checking posts that didn't need checking, thinking about choices people make when they're tired of surviving. I started arriving earlier than usual, not because the work demanded it, but because I needed the quiet before Natalie and Alice showed up. Morning used to belong to me, the fields half lit, the air sharp, the kind of solitude that steadies your breathing. Lately, that solitude felt crowded with thoughts I hadn't invited. Natalie noticed the shift. She always did. This time, she didn't adjust to meet me halfway. Alice felt it first. She stopped bringing her homework into the kitchen and stayed closer to Natalie's side, quiet in a way that felt like self-correction. One afternoon, she asked if they'd done something wrong. Natalie told her no, that grown-ups sometimes just get tired. The explanation didn't satisfy either of them. The work suffered in ways that don't show up on spreadsheets. Decisions stalled. Conversations ended too early. Once I saw Natalie hesitate before knocking on my door, then turn and walk back down the hall. The sight landed heavier than any argument would have. The breaking point came quietly. It always does. I found a printed resignation letter on my desk late one afternoon, folded neatly, unsigned. Natalie stood in the doorway, hands clasped in front of her like she was waiting for a verdict. She said the city offer had come back, that it made sense. Better schools, stability, a clean reset. For Alice, she added, like she needed to remind me. I looked at the letter longer than necessary. There were a dozen practical reasons to let her go. Fewer complications, clearer lines, a return to the life I understood. I could feel the farm already settling into that decision, ready to absorb the loss the way land absorbs rain. "I won't stop you," I said finally. It was the safest sentence I knew. Natalie nodded once. No anger, no plea, just acceptance. She turned to leave, then hesitated, only for a second. "I answered you honestly," she said. "I just need to know that didn't make things worse." I opened my mouth, closed it. Some truths take too long to surface. When she left, the house felt hollow in a way I couldn't justify. I stood alone in the office, the letter still on my desk, and realized something that made my chest ache. I hadn't asked that question because I wanted information. I'd asked because I was already afraid of losing her. The farm didn't wait for my indecision. It never has. 3 days after Natalie left the letter on my desk, the pump near the lower field failed just as the temperature dropped overnight. Water pressure fell. Alarms tripped. And by sunrise I was ankle-deep in mud, trying to fix a system I barely understood without the notes she always left for me. The land has a way of exposing what you take for granted. Miguel offered help. So did 2 others. I waved them off more sharply than necessary and worked until my hands shook from cold and frustration. It wasn't about pride. It was punishment. Mine, though I didn't admit it. Alice didn't come by after school anymore. The kitchen stayed clean. Too clean. I caught myself listening for sounds that never arrived. Soft footsteps, a child's laugh, the low hum Natalie made when she was concentrating. Silence, once my ally, had turned against me. Thursday evening, I drove into town for supplies I could have ordered online. At the grocery store, I saw Natalie in the cereal aisle. Alice was perched on the cart like she belonged there. Natalie looked tired. Not the end-of-day tired, I knew, but the kind that settles in when you're bracing for a change you didn't ask for. Alice spotted me first and waved without hesitation. Natalie followed her daughter's gaze. For a moment, neither of us moved. We exchanged polite words. Weather, school, neutral ground. Alice talked about a class project she was excited about, filling the space we were too careful to occupy. When they turned down another aisle, I stood there longer than necessary, staring at shelves I didn't need. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the resignation letter in front of me, and finally let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding. What does holding on cost when letting go hurts more? I thought about my father. How he'd stayed alone after my mother left, convincing himself it was simpler that way. How the farm had become both refuge and excuse. The next morning, I drove to the school before I could talk myself out of it. I waited until Natalie walked Alice to the gate. When Natalie saw me, her shoulders tensed, not defensively, but like someone preparing for impact. "I'm not here to pressure you," I said, because I needed that to be true. I need to understand what I'm losing. Natalie studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded toward Alice, already disappearing through the school gate. "Not here," she said quietly, "but I'm listening." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. But it was the first time in days the distance between us felt like something that could still be crossed. We met at the edge of the property, near the old fence line my father never bothered to replace. It was neutral ground, close enough to the farm that I could still pretend this was practical, far enough that it didn't feel like an ambush. The sky hung low and pale, the kind of morning that looks undecided about becoming anything at all. Natalie arrived alone. She parked, stepped out, folded her arms against the cold. No hostility in her posture. Just caution. Earned caution. "I won't keep you long," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I hope not," she replied, not unkindly. I told her about the pump failure, about how much I hadn't realized she carried until it was suddenly gone. It was the easiest part, the facts, the logistics. I've always been better with what can be measured. "That's not why you're here," she said. She was right. I took a breath that felt like crossing a line I'd drawn myself years ago. "I don't know how to do this without turning it into a mistake," I admitted. "But I know that pretending I don't feel anything is already costing me more than I'm willing to pay." Natalie didn't interrupt. She listened the way she always did, fully, without leaning away. "I'm not asking you to stay because it's convenient," I continued. "Or because the farm needs you. I'm asking because I don't want to lose you without at least being honest about why." Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that waits to see if you'll flinch. Natalie exhaled slowly. "I can't afford uncertainty," she said. "Not with Alice. I've made choices based on feelings before. I paid for them." "I know," I said. "I won't promise what I can't give, but I won't hide behind distance anymore." She studied my face like she was searching for cracks. Maybe she found some. Maybe that was the point. "I need time," she said finally. "And I need to know that if I say yes to staying, it's not temporary in the way people say it is." I nodded. Time I could give. Certainty I was still learning. Natalie didn't leave right away. She stood by her car longer than necessary, keys still in her hand, eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder, like she was listening for a signal that wasn't sound. I waited. I'd learned that pushing was the fastest way to lose her trust. The wind moved through the dry grass, bending it all in the same direction, like the land itself had already chosen. "I don't need grand promises," she said finally. "I need to know you won't disappear the moment this gets hard." "I won't," I said. The words came out simple. No decoration. I don't do disappearing. I do staying. Sometimes too much. That earned a quiet breath of a laugh from her. Not humor, recognition. She turned to face me fully then. The space between us felt different now. Charged but steady, like something waiting, not rushing. I could see the conflict in her eyes. The mother weighing risk. The woman wanting something she hadn't allowed herself to want in a long time. "This can't just be about us," she said. "Alice comes first." "I know," I replied. "She always will." Natalie searched my face for hesitation. She didn't find it. What she found must have been enough, because she stepped closer. Not all the way, just into the space where intention becomes visible. My breath caught before I could stop it. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," I said. "That feels fair." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Natalie lifted her hand, slowly, giving me time to step back if I wanted to. I didn't. Her fingers brushed my sleeve first, then my wrist, grounding, not demanding. When she leaned in, it wasn't sudden. It was careful. A question. Our lips met softly. No urgency, no claiming. Just contact. Brief, tentative, real. The kind of kiss that doesn't try to take anything, only to confirm what's already there. When we pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine for a second. Eyes closed. "That," she said quietly, "wasn't a mistake." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. It wasn't a beginning. Not exactly. But it was a yes." Natalie didn't move back to the city. She didn't announce it either. No dramatic conversation. No declaration that wrapped everything up neatly. She stayed, the way people do when a decision has already settled somewhere deeper than logic. We told Alice first, not with promises, but with honesty. That some things were changing, that some things weren't. Alice listened seriously, then asked if she could keep feeding the horses after school. When I said yes, she smiled like that was all she needed to know. We moved carefully after that. Not because we were unsure, but because we were learning how to carry each other without dropping anything important. Natalie kept her independence. I kept my limits. Only now they were doors instead of walls. We talked more. About money. About school schedules. About fear. About the kind of future that doesn't erase the past but makes room around it. The farm responded the way land does when you treat it with patience. The pump got fixed. The weather eased. The crops didn't magically recover, but they held. Some seasons are about survival, not abundance. Natalie understood that. She'd been living in that space for years. There were nights we sat on the porch without touching, just sharing the quiet. Others where her hand found mine like it had always belonged there. The kiss didn't become habit. It became language, used when words weren't enough, never when they were. Alice changed the most. She grew lighter, louder. She stopped asking if they were going to leave. She started asking where things belonged. The farm gave her something solid. Natalie gave her consistency. And somehow, without planning it, I gave her presence. I thought love would feel like risk forever, like standing on ground that might give way if you leaned too hard. What I learned instead was this. Some risks don't shake the earth. They anchor you to it. I didn't lose myself by letting Natalie stay. I found the part of me that had been waiting, quietly, stubbornly, for a reason to open the gate. The farm is still work. Life is still uncertain. Nothing here is perfect or guaranteed. But when I walk the fields now, the land feels shared. And for the first time, that doesn't scare me.